Waitress poured boiling coffee on Baron Trump's face, but she had no idea he owns the restaurant. The bustling diner was like any other, filled with the comforting aroma of freshly brewed coffee and sizzling bacon. It was the kind of place where regulars gathered every morning, the chatter of the morning crowd blending with the clinking of plates and silverware. It was cozy, familiar, and offered a sense of calm to those who needed it. And for Samantha, the young waitress working that morning, it was just another shift. She'd been at the diner for a few months now, taking orders, serving coffee, and always trying to keep the flow of the place steady. She had learned to deal with the occasional grumpy customer, the mix-ups, and the busy rush hours with a smile. But on this particular morning, things were about to change in a way she could never have imagined. Samantha walked over to the table where a man was sitting alone, reading a newspaper. He looked to be in his late teens, dressed casually in a hoodie, looking like any other young guy just grabbing a quick breakfast. She didn't think twice as she approached his table. "Good morning. What can I get you today?" Samantha asked brightly, ready to take the usual order. The young man looked up at her, and their eyes met. His expression was calm, yet there was something familiar about him, though she couldn't quite place it. He gave her a friendly yet distant smile and looked back down at the menu. "I'll have a coffee, black. And maybe a side of toast," he replied nonchalantly. "Coming right up," Samantha said, jotting it down and heading off to the counter to get his order. As she prepared the coffee, she couldn't help but glance back toward the young man. His face seemed oddly familiar, like someone she might have seen on TV or in a magazine. But she shrugged it off. She couldn't possibly know him, right? Once the coffee was ready, she carefully poured it into the mug, the steam rising, the aroma filling the air. It was a busy morning, but Samantha had done this 100 times before. She grabbed the pot of hot coffee and made her way back to the young man's table. The diner's hustle and bustle made it easy to get distracted, and that's exactly what happened in that moment. As she approached the table, a sudden jolt of her elbow bumped into the edge of the table, sending the coffee sloshing toward the man. In an instant, the hot liquid splashed out of the cup and onto his face. The young man gasped in shock as the scalding coffee hit his skin, and Samantha froze, horrified at what had just happened. "Oh my God! I'm so sorry," she exclaimed, her voice trembling. "I didn't mean to." She rushed to grab napkins, quickly wiping at the coffee that had spilled across his face and shirt. But the young man just sat there, stunned, staring back at her in silence. "I'm so sorry," Samantha repeated, her hands shaking as she wiped the napkins over his face, desperately trying to fix what she had done. She felt like the floor should open up and swallow her. How could she have been so careless? As she continued to apologize, a silence fell over the table. She could feel the eyes of the other customers on them, watching the scene unfold. The young man's face was still unreadable, his gaze never leaving hers. "Hey, are you okay?" Samantha asked hesitantly, still wiping his face with the napkin. He nodded slowly, still silent, before glancing around the diner. The quiet hum of chatter resumed around them, but there was an underlying tension. Samantha felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment as she stepped back, waiting for him to say something. Finally, after a long pause, he spoke, his voice calm, almost amused. "It's fine," he said. "It's not the first time I've had coffee spilled on me." Samantha's eyes widened in surprise. "Really? I mean, I feel terrible. I'll pay for your meal. I'll get you a new drink or—" Before she could continue, the young man held up a hand, cutting her off. He stood up from his seat, brushing the coffee stains off his jacket, and then gave her a soft smile. "No need," he said, his tone more relaxed now. "It's not a big deal. Honestly, I've had worse. Just, maybe take it easy next time?" Samantha nodded frantically, still not entirely sure how to process what had just happened. The man gave her one final glance, his expression still unreadable, before he turned and walked toward the back of the diner. Samantha was left standing there, her hands still shaking from the unexpected incident. The other customers seemed to have returned to their meals, but the whole atmosphere felt different now. She couldn't stop replaying the moment in her head, how she had spilled the coffee, how awkward it had been, and how the young man hadn't reacted angrily or rudely. But something about it still didn't sit right with her. She shook her head and turned back to the counter, trying to get her mind off the accident. Maybe she had just imagined it, but there was something about him. That look in his eyes. He had seemed so familiar. Samantha worked the rest of her shift in a daze. As the diner's lunch rush began to settle down, the young man left without another word. He paid for his meal, leaving a tip, and left the diner, disappearing into the street outside. It wasn't until later that evening, when Samantha was scrolling through her phone, that she came across a news article. The headline caught her eye: Barron Trump spotted at local diner. Her heart skipped a beat as she read the article, and then it hit her. The young man she had just spilled coffee on, the one with the familiar face, Barron Trump. She stared at the photo accompanying the article, her eyes widening in disbelief. The young man from earlier in the day had been none other than Barron Trump, the son of former President Donald Trump. She felt a mix of shock and confusion. How had she not recognized him? The entire encounter felt like a surreal blur, but it was real. She had just had a brush with someone from one of the most well-known families in the country, and she had made a complete fool of herself. But then something else clicked. Barron Trump had walked out of the diner with a quiet smile, completely unfazed by the incident. He hadn't caused a scene, hadn't demanded anything. Instead, he'd simply taken it in stride, in a way that left Samantha in awe. He hadn't reacted the way she would have expected someone of his stature to react. He was calm, collected, and didn't seem to care about the small mistake she had made. In the end, Samantha couldn't help but admire the way he handled the situation. It was humbling, and it was a reminder that even in the most embarrassing moments, kindness and understanding went a long way. The next day, Samantha couldn't stop thinking about Barron's reaction, and as much as she tried to brush it off, she couldn't help but feel a strange sense of connection to him. It wasn't about his family or his wealth, it was about his grace under pressure, something that she had learned to appreciate. It reminded her that we are all human, no matter who we are, and sometimes, a simple act of kindness can change everything. And for Samantha, it was a lesson she would never forget. Samantha couldn't help but replay the events of the previous day over and over again in her mind. The strange calmness of Barron Trump, his lack of anger or frustration, stuck with her. She had expected some form of a reaction, maybe even a confrontation, but instead, he had responded with an understanding that left her speechless. There was something almost refreshing about it, a quality that made her reconsider the way she had handled interactions with others, especially in tense situations. The next few days at the diner were a blur. Samantha threw herself into work, trying to forget about the incident, but it lingered in the back of her mind. Every time she saw someone who looked vaguely familiar, she couldn't help but wonder if they were another celebrity, another person who could change the course of her day. It wasn't until a few days later, when she was working the evening shift, that she had another brush with fame. The diner was relatively quiet, the usual dinner crowd enjoying their meals when the door opened with a soft jingle. Samantha glanced up to see none other than Barron Trump standing in the doorway. He was dressed casually, just as he had been before, black hoodie, jeans, and sneakers, but there was something different in the air now. His presence seemed almost surreal, and Samantha's heart skipped a beat when she realized who it was. He walked in without any fanfare, his eyes scanning the room before landing on an empty booth in the corner. He made his way over, and Samantha, feeling a mix of nerves and curiosity, quickly grabbed a menu and made her way over to his table. "Hi there," she said, her voice a bit higher than usual. "Welcome back. How are you today?" Barron looked up at her, offering a small smile. "Hey, I'm good. Just came in for some coffee again," he said, his tone casual, as if nothing had happened between them the other day. Samantha's mind raced. He was back. He was back at the diner after everything that had happened. And he wasn't angry. He didn't seem upset or resentful. Instead, he was acting like it was no big deal. He was treating her like any other customer, and it made her feel both relieved and awkward at the same time. "Well, I'll get you your usual," Samantha said, trying to keep her composure. She could feel her face flush, but she tried to stay calm. This was just another customer, right? She was just doing her job. As she turned to walk away, she heard him speak again. "Actually, could I get some water too? And maybe something to snack on? I'm starving." Samantha nodded, relieved that he hadn't made her feel any more awkward than she already did. "Sure thing. I'll be right back with your order." As she made her way to the counter, she couldn't stop thinking about how calm Barron had been. He hadn't reacted at all like she expected. She had spilled hot coffee on his face, and he hadn't even blinked. He was a millionaire's son, a well-known figure, and yet he seemed like just another guy having a casual meal. It was almost as if he wasn't concerned with the status of things, but rather with the human element, the simplicity of sitting down for a meal and enjoying the moment. The evening passed in a blur. Samantha continued to serve the other customers, but her mind kept drifting back to Barron's table. She couldn't help but glance over at him every so often, wondering what was going through his mind. Was he thinking about the coffee incident, or was it just a blip in his life, something that didn't even merit a second thought? She couldn't be sure, but she didn't want to bring it up. It felt strange, like it wasn't something that needed to be addressed. As she brought his coffee and snack to his table, Barron looked up at her and smiled again. "Thanks. I've got to say, this is the best coffee in town." Samantha couldn't help but smile back. It felt like an acknowledgement, like a silent forgiveness, even though she hadn't done anything wrong. "I'm glad you like it. If there's anything else, just let me know." For the next hour or so, they exchanged polite small talk, talking about everything from the weather to her plans for the weekend. The conversation was easy, and despite her initial nerves, Samantha began to feel more at ease. It was almost like they had both decided to move past the coffee incident without needing to make it a big deal. As Barron finished his coffee, he stood up, preparing to leave. He gave Samantha a nod of thanks, and as he walked toward the door, he turned around. "By the way, don't worry about it. The coffee thing, it's all good. I was just surprised, but hey, accidents happen." Samantha's heart skipped a beat at his words. She hadn't expected him to bring it up at all. But his calm, kind reassurance made her feel like everything was finally behind them. "Thank you," she said, her voice warm now. "I really appreciate you being so understanding." Barron smiled, then waved as he walked out of the diner, disappearing into the night. The next day, Samantha arrived at work to find a small, beautifully written thank you note left for her on the counter. It was from Barron. The note read, "Thank you for the great service and the kind words. I've had a lot of great experiences in life, but it's the little things that make a big difference. I'll be sure to stop by again soon. Keep doing what you're doing." She stared at the note for a moment, a smile spreading across her face. This wasn't a typical tip or a simple thank you. This was something deeper, a gesture of appreciation from someone who clearly understood that kindness was never out of place. It was a reminder that, no matter who you were or what you had, it was your actions and how you treated others that really mattered. The following week, the incident at the diner began to make its rounds in the local news. People were intrigued by the simple act of kindness shown by Barron Trump, and soon, the story became a topic of conversation among the regulars at the diner. Some people were amazed by how gracious he had been, while others were impressed by how down-to-earth he seemed despite his family's wealth and prominence. But for Samantha, the incident had become more than just a story. It had been a lesson in humility, in understanding that everyone makes mistakes. It was about how we respond to those mistakes, and how we chose to treat others when things go wrong. A few weeks later, Barron returned to the diner. This time, Samantha wasn't as nervous. She greeted him with a smile, and he greeted her back, just as casually as before. "Back for more of that famous coffee?" Samantha asked with a grin. Barron smiled, nodding. "Of course. Can't find anything quite like it anywhere else." Over the next few months, Barron became a regular at the diner. While Samantha tried to treat him like any other customer, the bond between them grew. Barron continued to show kindness to everyone around him, always polite, always respectful. Samantha learned a lot about him, about his quiet nature, his thoughtful demeanor, and his ability to make anyone feel comfortable around him. The coffee incident had turned into a reminder for Samantha that even the most famous people can be humble, that mistakes don't define us, and that kindness can turn an awkward situation into something meaningful. As the weeks passed, the dynamic at the diner subtly shifted. Samantha had grown more accustomed to Barron's regular visits, and it seemed like he genuinely enjoyed the simple, homey atmosphere of the place. He was a young man who, despite the weight of his family's name, didn't demand attention. Instead, he seemed to appreciate the anonymity that the diner provided. It was clear that he valued the moments of peace he found in a small, quiet corner of the world. The more she interacted with him, the more Samantha realized that Barron was far from the entitled figure that some might assume he was. Yes, he came from a well-known family, but he didn't carry himself with arrogance or entitlement. He wasn't like some of the entitled customers she had served before, who expected special treatment because of who they were. Barron simply sat at the same booth, ordered his coffee, and chatted with her like any other regular would. He wasn't the only one who enjoyed the calm of the diner. Samantha, who had once felt uncertain and a bit starstruck, now felt at ease in his presence. She was no longer worried about making mistakes in front of him. The coffee spill was long behind them, and it had, in a strange way, broken the ice between them. Their conversations had gradually evolved. It wasn't just about the weather or coffee anymore. They talked about life, aspirations, and challenges. Barron shared snippets of his life, how he tried to stay grounded despite the attention he got because of his family. Samantha, in return, told him about her dreams, her plans for the future, and how she loved working in the diner. She'd always enjoyed the sense of community it provided, the way people came in and out of each other's lives. One evening, just before the dinner rush, Barron walked in again. Samantha was finishing up an order when she noticed him looking around for a seat. He usually came in the late afternoons, when the diner wasn't too busy, and this time was no different. She was quick to notice him, her heart skipping just a little as she walked over to his table. "Hey, Barron. The usual?" she asked, a smile creeping onto her face. "Yeah, sounds perfect," he replied with a grin, settling into his usual spot. "How's your day going?" "It's going all right," Samantha said, glad for the break in the usual monotony of work. "Busy, but nothing too crazy. How about you? How's life treating you these days?" Barron leaned back in his seat, his expression thoughtful. "It's been a bit hectic, actually. You know, trying to balance everything. It's not always easy having so many people tell you what you should be doing. But I'm figuring it out." Samantha raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "You ever feel like it's just too much?" Barron sighed. "All the time. But I try to remember that I'm not just a name or a title. I'm a person with my own goals, even if some people have other expectations." Samantha nodded, understanding more than he might have realized. "Yeah, I get that. People expect a lot from you, and sometimes it's hard to live up to those expectations. But you don't have to be anyone other than yourself." Barron gave her a long look, as though considering her words. "That's exactly what I try to remind myself of. I'm just a guy trying to figure things out. And sometimes, I just want to relax and enjoy the simple things. Like coffee." She laughed, feeling the weight of the conversation ease. "I can't blame you there. It's easy to get caught up in everything else. But it's the little things that matter, right?" Barron smiled, his eyes softening. "Exactly." Samantha made her way to the counter to grab his coffee, her thoughts turning over his words. He was right. The little things mattered. And sometimes, people like Barron, with everything they had in the world, needed those moments of simplicity just as much as anyone else. The diner continued to be a sanctuary for Barron, a place where he didn't have to worry about his name or his status. Every time he walked through the door, it was like entering a world where he was just another customer, another guy enjoying a quiet meal. But as much as the diner was a refuge for him, it had become something more for Samantha too. Her initial nerves about serving Barron Trump had long since faded. She saw him not as the son of a prominent figure, but as a young man with dreams, worries, and aspirations just like anyone else. The connection they had formed over the past few months was subtle but meaningful, built on shared moments of understanding. It wasn't just about being polite, it was about truly connecting with someone, regardless of their background. Over time, Barron began opening up more about his life, particularly his feelings of isolation. He often spoke of how his family's fame had created a bubble around him, one that made it hard for him to find genuine connections. Samantha was one of the few people who didn't treat him like a celebrity. She didn't act starstruck or fawn over him. To her, he was just Barron, the young man who sat in her section and ordered coffee. And in turn, Barron started to trust her, opening up in ways he hadn't with anyone else. One day, as the late afternoon sun streamed through the diner windows, Barron arrived with a different energy. There was a sense of purpose about him, a quiet determination in his gaze as he walked to his usual booth. Samantha noticed right away, and before he could settle in, she walked over to him with a welcoming smile. "Hey, Barron. You look like you've got something on your mind. Everything okay?" Barron smiled slightly, clearly pleased with her observation. "Yeah, actually. I've been thinking a lot about my future, about what I want to do with my life. And I think I finally figured it out. I want to do something more meaningful. I've been talking to my family about starting a new venture, one that focuses on helping others. Something that's my own, you know?" Samantha's interest piqued. "That sounds incredible, Barron. I'm proud of you for figuring that out. Whatever you do, I know it'll be something special." He looked up at her with a thoughtful expression. "Thanks. It feels like the right move. I want to give back more, not just for my family, but for me too. I want to make a difference in the world, even if it's in a small way." Samantha smiled warmly. "I think you're on the right track. You've got the right mindset. You don't need to live up to anyone else's expectations. Just do what feels true to you." Barron nodded, clearly reassured. "Thanks, Samantha. You've been a great friend through all of this. I don't know where I'd be without your support." Samantha felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words. She hadn't expected to become someone Barron would confide in so openly, but here they were, talking about his future, his goals, and his journey. "Well, I'll always be here to listen," she said with a soft smile. "You're not alone in this, Barron." They shared a moment of mutual understanding before Samantha left to grab his coffee and toast. As she walked away, she couldn't help but think that life had a funny way of bringing people together. Who would have thought that a simple spill of coffee would lead to something like this? The following weeks brought more shifts, more small talks, and more quiet moments between Barron and Samantha. The diner remained a place of solace for both of them, him escaping the weight of his family's expectations, and her finding purpose in the connections she made with the people around her. One evening, just before closing, Barron left a note for Samantha on the counter. It wasn't anything extravagant, just a simple message that left her heart full. "Thank you for being a part of my journey, even in the smallest of ways. You've reminded me that sometimes all we need is a cup of coffee and a friendly face. I'll never forget it." Samantha read the note twice, feeling a sense of warmth that she hadn't expected. What began as an embarrassing mistake had evolved into something far more meaningful. A friendship built on kindness, mutual respect, and understanding. The days following Barron's note felt different for Samantha. She had always loved her job at the diner, but now it had taken on a deeper meaning. It wasn't just about serving coffee or food anymore. It was about connections, about understanding people, no matter who they were. She had met many customers over the years, but Barron had been different. He had come into her life unexpectedly, and despite the coffee mishap that had started it all, he had become someone she could rely on for genuine conversation and a unique perspective on life. But Barron's visitations were becoming fewer and farther between. She had noticed that his demeanor had shifted somewhat. While he had been a regular fixture at the diner for months, there were longer stretches between his appearances. Samantha wondered if the stress of his decision to start his new venture had something to do with it. Maybe the weight of trying to establish something meaningful, something of his own, was pulling him away from his usual routine. She couldn't help but think back to their conversations about the future. Barron had always been so open about his aspirations, about wanting to help others, but now, the diner, his safe haven from the outside world, seemed to be a less frequent part of his life. One rainy evening, a few weeks after he had left her the note, Barron walked into the diner again. He looked different this time, tired, maybe, but determined. Samantha saw him immediately as he entered, and she couldn't help but smile at the sight of him. He was still wearing his usual black hoodie, but there was an intensity in his eyes, a fire that wasn't there before. As he approached the counter, Samantha greeted him with a smile. "Barron, long time no see. How've you been?" He returned her smile, but it was a bit strained. "Hey, Samantha. Yeah, it's been a while. I've been busy, trying to figure things out." She nodded, understanding that tone all too well. I get that. It's been pretty quiet around here without you. I'm glad you stopped by. Barron slid into his usual booth, taking a deep breath as if the weight of the world was resting on his shoulders. Samantha took a moment to grab a menu, but she didn't immediately rush to his table. Something about the way he was sitting there, staring out the window at the rain, made her pause. It was clear that whatever had been happening in his life was more than just work. It was personal. Samantha decided to take a chance. You want your usual coffee? She asked, leaning on the counter and catching his gaze. There was no pressure in her voice, just an invitation to reconnect. Barron looked up at her, meeting her eyes with a slight nod. Yeah, thanks. I could really use a cup right now. As she moved toward the coffee pot, she thought about how much Barron had shared with her over the past few months. They had talked about everything from his family to his ambitions, from the struggles of being in the spotlight to the difficulties of carving out his own identity. Yet there was something unspoken, something he hadn't yet shared. Samantha returned with his coffee, placing it in front of him before sitting down across the booth. You know, I've been thinking a lot about what you said before, about making a difference and doing something that matters. How's that been going? Barron sighed deeply, stirring his coffee absently before responding. It's harder than I thought, to be honest. I had this idea about starting a nonprofit, something that focuses on giving back to underprivileged communities, but the more I get into it, the more complicated it feels. I'm trying to figure out where to start, how to make it sustainable, and how to get people on board. Everyone has ideas, but it's tough to turn those ideas into reality. Samantha sat back, processing his words. She knew how overwhelming it could be to have a vision but not know where to begin. She had seen people with dreams and goals falter simply because the road ahead seemed too daunting. But she also knew that the first step was always the hardest. Barron had already taken that step by starting to build something meaningful. Starting can be the toughest part, Samantha said gently, but I believe you've got the right idea. It's about taking it one step at a time and finding people who believe in it as much as you do. No one gets it right on the first try, but that doesn't mean it's not worth it. Barron looked at her, his expression softening as he listened. You really think so? Samantha smiled warmly. I do. I think you're on the right path. Just don't let the fear of failure stop you from trying. He sat there for a moment, contemplating her words, then let out a soft chuckle. You're right, you know. I think I needed to hear that. It's easy to get stuck in your head, especially when things aren't moving as quickly as you want them to. She nodded. I totally get that. Sometimes it feels like nothing is happening, but even small progress counts. Barron smiled and took a sip of his coffee. For a moment, the tension seemed to melt away. The weight of his worries, of everything he was trying to build, seemed to lift, if only for a moment. Samantha could tell that her words had made a difference, even if just for today. She had given him the space to talk, to process, and to reflect. That was something she had learned over time. Sometimes, being a good listener was more important than offering solutions. So, Samantha said, changing the subject slightly to lighten the mood, what's next for you? Got any plans for the weekend? Barron grinned, clearly relieved to shift gears. I'm actually heading up to the mountains for a few days. I need some time to think things through. Maybe do some hiking, clear my mind. Samantha raised an eyebrow. Sounds like a good idea. Time to get away from everything for a bit. Exactly, Barron said, leaning back in his booth. I've been so wrapped up in this project that I haven't had much time to just breathe. I'm looking forward to some peace and quiet. Good for you, Samantha said. Everyone needs to recharge, especially when they're working on something important. Barron smiled, clearly grateful for her understanding. Thanks, Samantha. I think this is exactly what I needed. Over the next few weeks, Barron kept his word. He took time for himself, spending weekends hiking and reflecting. When he returned, he seemed more centered, more confident in his decision to move forward with his venture. He came to the diner less often but still stopped by occasionally, often when he needed a quiet moment to himself. Samantha was always happy to see him, and their conversations, though less frequent, were still filled with the same ease and understanding. Eventually, Barron's project began to take shape. He He partnered with a few like-minded individuals who shared his vision and launched a small nonprofit dedicated to providing education and resources to underprivileged communities. The work was slow at first, but with Barron's determination and his ability to connect with others, the project started to gain traction. As he worked tirelessly to get it off the ground, Barron found himself becoming more and more committed to the cause. Samantha watched from a distance, proud of what Barron was accomplishing. He had found his path, and though it had taken some time and soul-searching, it was clear that his passion for helping others was genuine. She had been a part of his journey, a quiet supporter who had helped him rediscover his confidence when it had faltered. One afternoon, after Barron had made another visit to the diner, he left a note on the counter once again. It wasn't long, just a short message, but it meant a lot to Samantha. "Thank you, Samantha, for always listening. You've helped me more than you know. I'm excited for the future, and I'm grateful for your encouragement. I'll never forget it." Samantha read the note with a smile, the warmth of his words filling her with a sense of pride. She had become a part of something bigger than herself, and in her own quiet way, she had made a difference in Barron's life, just as he had in hers.